everyone. This isn't going to be like my usual videos. Instead of pretending I'm some big-brained analyst trying to blow everyone's minds away with my incredible insight, instead, I'm going to allow myself to be vulnerable and discuss my personal experience playing the Beginner's Guide, which truly resonated with me. Please keep in mind that I'm going to be addressing most, but not all of what this game has to offer, so you shouldn't treat this as a replacement for playing the game itself. If you've been interested in checking it out, I'm going to be spoiling all the important details. But if you just want to watch the video and have no interest in playing the game, I promise you'll be able to follow along just fine without having played it already. With that out of the way, let's start at the very beginning. I was having a discussion with friends about the intentions of the creator in regards to their work, which prompted them to recommend me the Beginner's Guide, on the basis that it had interesting things to say on the subject. Intrigued, I picked it up on sale for about $5, saw that it only took an hour and a half to complete and figured, yeah, why not? If I ended up hating it, it wouldn't be a big deal because I didn't spend much time or money on it. So I jumped into the game completely blind, not knowing anything about it prior to booting it up. I didn't even bother to watch the trailer on the Steam page. I start the game up and I am immediately struck with very direct narration, which was odd at first, but I quickly acclimated to the disembodied voice who would become my companion on this journey, so to speak. He introduces himself as Davey, the writer of the Stanley Parable, which at the time of playing the Beginner's Guide, I had heard of and even owned in my Steam library, but had yet to actually play. Davey then starts talking about Coda, a friend of his who used to make his own games in an engine known as Source, the same one used to power titles created by Valve, most notably Half-Life and Portal. He did this up until sometime around 2011. This immediately made me start questioning whether Coda was real or not. Okay, to be clear, this is not in the sense that Davey was crazy and he was just imagining Coda the whole time, but rather if the narrative of the Beginner's Guide was a work of fiction. This thought came to mind because, as stated earlier, Davey explicitly introduced himself as the writer of the Stanley Parable. Davey isn't a character. He's an actual human being introducing himself as the individual that wrote a real-ass game that is literally sitting in my Steam library. The line between fiction and reality was very blurry for me at this point, as both possibilities seemed equally plausible. While the temptation was there, I refrained from exiting out an attempt to verify, figuring that it would tarnish the experience. That said, from here on out, it was something that was always stuck in the back of my mind throughout the majority of my playthrough. Davey states that the Beginner's Guide is a compilation of all of Coda's games, and the purpose behind doing this is twofold. For one, he's hoping that by putting this out there, it can somehow reach Coda, and he can get in contact with him again, since he hasn't been able to speak to him since 2011. The other reason is to share his interpretation of these games in the hopes that it would convey what is so special about them to everyone playing them, which would hopefully inspire Coda to start creating again. Admittedly, I was struck by the morality of Davey possibly selling his friend's work for his own financial benefit. But not knowing the full context, I figured I should see it through to the end before making any snap judgments. For all I knew at this point in time, Coda was perfectly okay with Davey doing this. Or maybe Davey intended to turn around and give Coda the money he earned off of the Beginner's Guide. I wasn't sure, so it wasn't entirely fair to assume. Even still, it did rub me the wrong way on some level. Just the possibility that I could have given my money to someone that wasn't responsible for what I was playing made my skin crawl just a little bit. Anyways, the first game is not really a game per se, but rather a Counter-Strike map, which is supposedly the first thing Coda ever designed, as far as Davey knew at least. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to be slavishly commenting on every single one of Coda's games in excruciating detail. I'm just going to discuss the ones that either left an impression on me, or I simply have something to say about Davey's narration. Speaking of which, Davey does in fact say something rather interesting here.
This is what I like about all of Coda's games. I mean, not that they're all fascinating as games, but that they are all going to give us access to their creator. I want us to see past the games themselves. I want to get to know who this human being really is.
So the reason I bring this up is because I rarely do this myself, in that I treat art as if it were spawned in the ether, so to speak. Obviously, on an intellectual level, I understand that a piece of art is created by a person or multiple people, but I tend to treat it as divorced from the artist because something death of the author. On the rare occasion that I do acknowledge the connection between creation and creator, it more often than not happens with music. For example, one of my favorite musicians is Devin Townsend, who has gone on record to say that his albums are typically sonic representations of his headspace at that time of his life. However, even with this in mind, I don't go as far as to assume that the literal contents of the music are perfect reflections of who he is as an individual. For example, it wouldn't make any sense for me to look at albums such as City and Deconstruction and assume that he was this insane person who was angrily yelling and shouting all the time during his everyday life. I believe this line of thinking is how you get fans that become disappointed when they meet the people behind such aggressive music. They're confronted with the realization that these are normal human beings and not the larger-than-life legends that they built up in their minds. When you see the music videos and hear the songs, these individuals can feel like they're beyond human somehow. They're not. Of course they're not. It's just how these artists express themselves. The point I'm trying to make is that while art can say something about the artist, it's not a good idea to assume that you know who this person is just because of the art. While a person can, and often do, pour their humanity into their work, not everyone operates like that. And sometimes what they make doesn't say as much about them as one might think. Escape from Whisper is the first game that Coda ever properly made. I bring this one up for a couple of reasons. The first one being that I find it odd that Davey decided to skip the maze section of this game. This made me start to question the validity of his intentions to analyze the games in order to understand Coda. If that were truly the case, then why skip this portion? Something else that struck me as odd is at the end, where the player jumps into a laser and dies. That part specifically isn't what bothered me, or at least it didn't in the moment. What did was when Davey revealed that this was actually a modification to demonstrate what he thought Coda initially intended to happen. You're then allowed to jump into the laser again, but this time, doing so will cause your character to begin floating above the entirety of the game world. Davey seems certain that this floating is not only an unintentional glitch, but that this in turn became the impetus for Coda to create more abstract and surreal games. The reason this struck me as odd is that he essentially fabricated a scenario in his head and decided that this had to be what happened. That this glitch occurring through happenstance influenced the trajectory of Coda's games from that point on. While this could be the case, wasn't it just as likely that this was entirely intentional? That this floating effect was not a glitch, and that it was the intended ending for the game? Despite my initial concerns about the validity of Davey's musings on these games, I did remember that Davey was in fact friends with Coda, and that maybe he knew more than what he was sharing, which led to these statements. I wasn't totally sure, but I was eager to find out more. This is Coda's second game, and it's a very short one. The whole point is that you're forced to walk backwards, which will prompt certain messages to appear on the walls. There isn't a whole lot to say about this one. The message is kind of obvious in that it's about a woman who's uncertain about her future, and that if she keeps looking back to the past, how can she confront what's coming ahead? The reason I want to bring it up, however, is that it spotlights how eccentric of a creator Coda is, where he's willing to buck convention and force the player to walk backwards in order to get a point across. This is when I started to understand why Davey feels that these games say something about Coda as an individual. This game really struck me as the quirky creation of a kind of out there sort of guy. If the backwards game was when I started to come around to trusting Davey's word, then it was this game in particular that I totally bought into it, and I'll tell you why. When you walk up the stairs, suddenly the player is slowed to a crawl, and the door at the top of the stairs opens, much to my bewilderment. Thankfully, Davey added the option to set the walking speed back to normal in order to enter the room at the top. And when I do so, he says this.
Coda would often tell me that he didn't mind if people thought of him as cold or distant. He said that he knew that he was actually a vibrant and compassionate person, but that it takes time to really see that. It can be a very slow climb to get there.
Hearing this, the symbolism became so clear to me. The slow climb and imposing yet dull exterior represents how difficult and daunting it can be to get to know who Coda is. But the room represented his true nature, that of a warm and fascinating individual, bursting with interesting ideas. This is when Davey proved to be an authority on the subject of Coda and his games, because this all seemed to click and make so much sense. There seemed to be a real sense of purpose behind how these games were made, and the extra bits of information Davey divulged made that purpose come into focus. Now, the main reason I wanted to talk about this game in particular is because of the accessibility argument between Davey and Coda.
This is something that he and I used to argue about a lot. You know, whether a game ought to actually be playable, whether it means anything if no one can get through it. And I would always defend that, all this work goes into the game, why not make it playable and accessible? And so we just got into heated arguments over it, and there was one time that after one of these conversations, he went home, and a day or two later, he sent me a zip file entitled Playable Games that was full of hundreds of individual games, each of which was just an empty box that you walked around in and nothing else. Believe me, I played every single one of those just to find out if there was like a gag hidden somewhere. There wasn't.
This feels so genuine. Given how eccentric Coda seems to be up to this point, what with the backwards game, the stairs game, and now the current game originally having a section that forced the player to sit for an hour in a prison, this interaction comes across as completely real to me. So at this point, I'm becoming even more conflicted about the idea as to whether Coda is a real person or not. I mean, as authentic as this anecdote feels, it could absolutely be a fabrication. Yet, on the same token, it could just as easily not be. Well, another reason to talk about this game is the lamppost at the very end. Davey starts talking about how, for some reason, Coda decided that from now on, he wants his games to have an endpoint, and illustrates that desire with these lampposts. Admittedly, this did strike me to be somewhat at odds with the previous conversation about accessibility. I mean, why would Coda suddenly care about giving his games a proper endpoint when he doesn't even think that it matters that his games can be finished at all? That being said, I can't deny what I'm looking at. The lamppost is literally right in front of me, so I buy into it, figuring it's just another one of Coda's quirks. He certainly has enough of those to go around at this point. This is a particularly important game for Davey, as he reveals that this is the first game of Coda's he ever played and how he met him.
This was actually the first game of his that I ever played. This was shortly after I met him at a weekend game jam in Sacramento, where I grew up. I saw him working on this very level, and it was just so different from anything that anyone else was doing. So right away I was like, I have to be friends with this person. In retrospect, I think I was probably a bit too pushy, trying to get his attention. I was over-enthusiastic. But he was very gracious about it and very patient with me. And I cooled off eventually.
I must confess that I related to this to a degree that I'm almost embarrassed to admit. There have been certain people that I looked up to, admired, and tried to seek the attention of, but I was always so self-conscious about how annoying I was coming off by trying to get said attention. I couldn't help but see myself in Davey here. It's ironic then that I began to also see myself in Coda shortly after with this line.
To me, they convey a sense of loneliness. I see this person who's filled with thoughts and feelings and beliefs and has no way to express them except as scattered and unheard voices in a game that wasn't meant to be played.
As someone that ostensibly creates YouTube videos, I sometimes feel that they're the only real way I can properly convey and express how I feel or think about something. They're also a way for me to find and establish connections with others. So unlike Coda, I make these videos to be watched, as you can clearly see. However, there's a lot that has remained on the cutting room floor. What you're looking at right now is my Google Drive, which contains numerous scripts that I've worked on to varying degrees over the years. Some may recognize that a few of them have been completed and were turned into videos. Many are half finished, with some I fully intend to complete, while others I've pretty much abandoned, and some were just an idea that didn't manifest beyond a title. In a way, the ones I've yet to finish are like Coda's games, scattered, unheard voices that may or may not ever be heard. The circumstances aren't exactly the same, of course, but the main conceit of having all these thoughts and feelings and concepts possibly never seeing the light of day is something that resonated with me deeply. This is a particularly important game for Coda, and Davey reveals this by tying it to his real-world behavior at the time.
I know that Coda really liked this game. Of all of his work, actually, this was the only one that he called me up to ask me to come over and look at it. This was during a period of a few months where he was like grossly happy all the time, just walked around with a constant smile on his face.
Davey again evokes his knowledge of Coda as a person to impose meaning into the game in a way that honestly makes sense. If I knew someone and they created something pleasant while they were in a good mood, it's hard not to link the two together. Granted, a lot of people are able to make all kinds of art regardless of how they actually feel. Happy people can make dark, disturbing work, and the opposite is true, because we're complex creatures that aren't solely defined by our emotional state. That said, some artists create art that is exclusively defined by their emotions. I mentioned Devin Townsend earlier, and he literally recorded a song called Shitstorm, a huge, angry, loud song right after he found out that his basement flooded and many of his belongings were permanently damaged. It's not hard to assume that the recording was directly affected by how he felt about this, and with that in mind, I think it makes sense for Coda to create a pleasant little game during a time he felt really good about himself. But then it ends.
But, of course, it can't last. The music stops, your companion is gone, it's time to leave. The door at the top of the hill is now open as well. Again, you can't stay in the dark space for too long. You just can't. You have to keep moving. It's how you stay alive.
The abrupt nature of how the house cleaning game ended seemed kind of off to me, as if it went against what the game was initially about. This game was about being in a good mood, listening to pleasant music, and just living life, even if it was doing chores. This ending just cut the music, and the character you were interacting with blinks out of existence, creating a sort of tonal whiplash. Even stranger is how the lamppost was placed in an area that seemed totally incomplete, like you weren't really meant to see it. At the time, I didn't think much more about it. Regardless, I knew that it felt wrong somehow. This one is known as The Theater, and is the first time that I found myself theory crafting about Coda. The premise is centered around the player interacting with a female photographer, and the dialogue choices you make are mostly chastised by the narrator for not being the way it happened. This is until towards the end, where you walk off stage and giant metal gates begin to fall behind you, while the narrator talks about how great you're doing all of a sudden. Davey internalizes this as Coda becoming more reclusive. While Davey himself doesn't confirm what I'm about to say, this led me to assume that this was Coda making a game about a woman he may have fallen in love with. I was thinking that this was about him reminiscing when they first met and when they started to date. Presumably, things turned out badly at some point, and then they broke up. leaving him feeling isolated, and that maybe he started to believe that the isolation was a good thing, because it meant he couldn't hurt her anymore, and he couldn't get hurt in the process either. Coming to this conclusion made me feel really sad about Coda. Now obviously I couldn't know for sure if this was truly the case or not, especially since it really wasn't backed up by anything Davey said. But when I think back to the previous house cleaning game, and how happy Coda was making that, this assumption made sense to me. That maybe he was dating her at the time, and that was the reason why he was so happy. This theory of mine was also emboldened by the fact that Davey had been doing the exact same thing throughout the entirety of the beginner's guide, tying who Coda is to his games, revealing that his games said something about him as a human being. It gave me some confidence that what I had taken from this game may have been true. I mean, why else was the game made like this? At the time, I really thought that was the point of it. So the games in between this one and the last one I spoke of have taken a drastic turn, echoing the unsettling tone set by the ending of the theater game, both in terms of content and the games themselves, as well as how Coda was behaving in real life. Coda put explicit dialogue in those games, bluntly stating how he doesn't enjoy making games anymore, despite the fact that he keeps at it. This sentiment comes to a head with this game, The Machine. This one is about a machine that stopped working, which the game itself eerily refers to as Coda. You play as a woman that harshly accosts the machine. Most of the dialogue options are some sort of verbal assault or threat. There's also dialogue that you can choose as the woman that demands that the machine apologize for leaving her. This immediately made me feel as if it was giving even more credence to my previous theory about Coda possibly breaking up with a woman he fell for and using his games as a coping mechanism. Very interestingly, this seemed to imply that Coda broke up with her, and doing so left him feeling profoundly conflicted. Did he feel that he wasn't good enough for her? Was the relationship too demanding and he cowered back into isolation? I wasn't sure, but my mind was racing with possibilities. Eventually, everything devolves into the destruction of Coda's previous work, as well as the machine itself. I couldn't help but feel that this was a cry for help from Coda. He was literally and figuratively this machine pumping out games, and now he's just done. He doesn't want to do it anymore. He's had enough. But there's something that keeps pulling him back in, something that compels him to keep doing it despite his heart not being in it anymore, which in all honesty is something that I found painfully relatable. There was a time where I released a video every single week. I had created these very straightforward reviews, and I was happy doing them at first, but at some point the creative process began to feel so stagnant and draining. I would ask myself, why do I keep throwing myself at this? To be perfectly honest, I didn't have an answer at the time. I still don't. And it took a while before I stopped and changed my approach. It was an important lesson for me to learn that if my heart isn't in it, if I don't feel that passion when I make something, that it's just going to be empty. So, if you're wondering why I upload so sporadically, there's your answer. I'm sorry about that, really. But I'd rather wait to put out something I truly want to make and can be proud of than to just do something for the sake of it. Davey then talks about how he thinks Coda is stuck in a rut, and to help him get out of it, he showed these games to some friends. He thought that by doing this, Coda could feel validated, that if people acknowledged and praised his work, that he would feel inspired again. I wasn't sure if this was the right course of action necessarily, but I could see where Davey was coming from. It seemed to me at least that his heart was in the right place. I can't deny that I also feel a sense of empowerment when people praise my work and tell me that I did a good job. That might sound small-minded to some, and Of course, it's not the only reason why I try to do good work, but it would be entirely deceptive to imply that it doesn't influence me, at least in some way. The Tower is Coda's final game. While the previous game, The Machine, definitely felt darker compared to most of his previous work, The Tower is easily the most oppressive in terms of atmosphere. The dark shadows and tall architecture made me feel small and insignificant, something that was in complete contrast to the rest of his games, where even when they started becoming morose in nature, they came across as personal in a way. This game is cold and distant. Even the music adds to this detached feeling. What particularly unsettled me, however, was Davey's concession that he didn't have anything meaningful to say about Coda with this game. Davey has been my rock during the course of the beginner's guide, this foundation that I could trust and rely on. Yet even he was at a loss for words. It made me feel like I was walking into uncharted territory, and suddenly my guide didn't know where to go. Not long into the game, there's a maze that resets the player's position every time a wall is touched. On top of that, the screen flashes red and makes an awful noise whenever this happens. Now that alone would make it thoroughly unpleasant, but what takes it over the edge is that the walls are fucking invisible. It would take a ridiculous amount of time to actually complete without any sort of hacking or cheats. Now, Coda had been needlessly obtuse about how to complete his games before, but he was never this cruel about it. Thankfully, Davey creates a bridge that allows you to bypass the maze altogether. However, this modification to the game prompts Davey to say something disturbingly revealing.
And to be fair, it's not like this is the first game that's needed some modification to be playable. Like the house cleaning game. You know, that one used to actually loop the cleaning chores and you just cleaned a house forever. I had to cut it off so that you could exit the house and the game would actually end. But that game had an idea that it was actually trying to communicate. What's the deeper idea behind the invisible maze?
This one confession nearly shattered my entire perception of Davey as a person. It wasn't simply that he changed the game. He had done that more than once throughout the beginner's guide in order to bypass certain obstacles. It's that he did so without saying that he did at the time. He presented the change in-game as if it was part of Coda's intentional design. He even gave his own interpretation of what it meant to Coda, which doesn't make any sense. Was he trying to spin some narrative to the player to try and make himself seem smart and then figured the player wouldn't notice? Was he a compulsive liar and he couldn't keep his fabrication straight anymore? I didn't know, but even though my faith in Davey took a considerable blow, leaving me dazed and confused, I knew I had to keep going, regardless of how bitter I was feeling. After the invisible maze, I was greeted by a couple more ridiculous obstacles, consisting of a numerical puzzle with absolutely no clues on how to solve it, and a door with a switch on the opposite side, making it literally impossible to solve through normal means, both of which required Davey's intervention in order to progress. After all that mean-spirited nonsense, and the foreboding atmosphere beating me down, all the while my thoughts are racing, questioning everything Davey has told me this entire time, wondering what's real or not. Suddenly, the scenery changes, and I'm hit with an earth-shattering revelation.
I'm the reason that you stopped making games, aren't I? It's because of what I did.
I'm not gonna lie, I actually stood there not moving for about a minute, as I was coming to grips with what I was looking at. After collecting myself, I pushed on to find more text on the walls that would further challenge what I thought I knew, revealing more pieces of information, such as Davey showing these games against Coda's wishes, that all the lampposts were planted by Davey, and another message strongly implying that Davey was imposing meaning onto the games where there were none, deconstructing everything I thought I knew about Davey, Coda, and these games. Was there anything I could trust about what Davey said? Were any of his interpretations valid anymore? Hell, were mine? After wrestling with such thoughts, I experienced what had to be the most unsettling moment in the entirety of the beginner's guide.
That's why I'm releasing this collection of your work, is because I haven't been able to find any other way to reach you. I've tried everything. And so a part of me has hope that if I put this compilation out into the world, and if I put my name on it, that maybe enough people will play it so that it'll find its way to you, so that I can tell you that I'm sorry. I know I screwed up. If I apologize to you truly and deeply, will you start making games again? Please, I need to feel okay with myself again. And I always felt okay as long as I had your work to see myself in. I mean, is something wrong with me? Because I know that I did an awful thing, and I'm doing it again right now. Like, I'm showing people your work, but I can't stop myself from doing it. That's how badly I need to feel something again, like I'm an addict. There has to be something wrong with me. Can I apologize? What if I tell you I was wrong? Will that work? Will that fix it? I don't know. I don't think it will, but there's nothing else that I can do. Just tell me what you want. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Please, start making games again. Please help me. Please give me some of whatever it is that makes you complete. I want whatever that wholeness is that you just summoned out of nothing and you put into your work. You were complete in some way that I never was. And I want to know I want to know how to be a good person. I want to know how not to hate myself. Please. I'm fading, and all I want is to know that I'm going to be okay.
I obviously had my suspicions throughout this experience, which were coming to a crescendo during this game in particular, but it was sometime during Davey's breakdown that I assured myself, okay, this game has to be a work of fiction, because there is no way anyone could possibly be this insensitive and miss the point this hard. And then I stopped myself, practically in mid-thought, because I realized what I just said to myself wasn't true. There are people that insensitive, that unwilling to listen to reason, that unable to see what's directly in front of them, that lacking in self-awareness. So even though I was still fairly sure at this point that the beginner's guide was a work of fiction, the fact that even a small possibility still existed that it could all be real gnawed at my brain and disturbed me beyond words as I sat there listening to Davey plead to Coda to come back and make games so that he can feel whole again. To my surprise, there's one more game. I assumed that this was made by Davey, maybe in an attempt to recreate the magic of Coda's games, although Davey himself doesn't confirm this. As I'm traversing through the ever-changing, abstract environments, Davey is second-guessing the things he said about Coda and berating himself for always needing more validation. Finally, he apologizes for not being able to stick with the player to the end, and as he exits, there I was, alone with my thoughts, in this unknown place. It's funny, you know, at this point I had lost all faith in Davey. Not only did he lie profusely, but he distorted and changed Coda's games both literally and figuratively, turned them into something they weren't just so he could see himself in someone else's work. Even worse, he took these games against Coda's wishes and showed them to other people so that he can feel good about himself. In a very real way, he even used me to that end. He deceived me, made me think that he was innocently trying to get in contact with his old friend, despite the fact that said friend never even wanted to speak with him again. Yet despite all of the horrible fucking shit Davey has done, I felt hollow without him. All of a sudden, that incompleteness that Davey felt when Coda exited his life, I felt when Davey left me. Despite knowing full well the nature of my dubious companion, it felt wrong to wander around in silence without his voice to guide me and make sense of the world whose meaning now eluded me. In this solitude, I began to ask myself, is Davey a bad person? I can see why a lot of people would immediately jump to, of course he is. He's a piece of shit that lied and stole from his own friend. Which is true. But does that really make him a bad person? Or does that simply make him human? I chastise Davey for imposing his own meaning into Coda's games, but truthfully, who am I to do that? I literally wasn't any better. Even I came up with some stupid ideas as to what these games meant to Coda. Maybe Coda wasn't coping from a breakup. Maybe he just likes photography. I don't know. At the very end of the game, there's a long hallway with that same laser beam from Coda's first game. Touching it, my character ascends, revealing a complex maze that stretches so far that it touches the star-filled sky, creating a horizon. It was in that moment that everything became clear to me.